It's so important to talk about this and to talk about your precious child as well. So people understand, this man that you were married to, this Ara, you knew him how long before you got married?
About a year, a little over a year.
Did you ever see anything that suggested to you that this man was capable of this kind of evil action?
There were red flags throughout the marriage, but nothing to the degree that would lead me to believe that a parent could kill their own child. I can't wrap my head around that.
So how was he as a father?
Ara was gone most of the time. He worked 6 days a week, or so he said. And when he was present, he wasn't really present. He would want to sleep in. He'd want to watch TV. Very minimal interaction with my son.
Well, how did your son feel about him when he was with him? Did he feel safe with him? Did he love him?
This past December, my son asked me if Mommy and Daddy were going to get back together. And I explained to him, I said, I'm done. And I told him, I said, no, honey. I said, Mommy and Daddy are not going to get back together. You know that Mama loves you, right? And he said, yes. And I said, you know that Daddy loves you, right? And he was 4 at the time. And he said, no, but I love him.
Or the wisdom of a pure heart, right?
Yes.
When and why did you decide to get a divorce?
I decided to ask for a divorce primarily because he was not around. I also requested a divorce because financially he didn't contribute to the marriage.
He was working 6 days a week?
So he said.
And what did you find out about that?
During my pregnancy, he worked for ITT, Technical Institute, and after I had my son, he told me that ITT was transferring him to the San Bernardino campus. What happened was, after I had asked for a divorce, I moved in with my parents, and